Hello, everybody. It's Walter, your favorite historian and educator, here today to talk to you about slavery and the U.S. Constitution. This is a subject that's obviously very controversial and one that does not draw neutral feelings to anyone who it is brought up to. All right. The U.S. Constitution, obviously, is a document that was originally written, allowed for the institution of slavery where it already existed. All right. And certainly did very little to prohibit it from spreading as new states joined the Union. However, I make the argument in this video that the Constitution was not a pro-slavery document, nor did it endorse the institution of slavery, but instead gave it begrudging recognition, largely as a concession to the southern states. The vast majority of framers at the Constitutional Convention of 1787 were not slaveholders. The Constitution was not written by a bunch of old slave-holding white men, all right, as many would like to argue. Yes, they were all white men, but out of the 55 men who ultimately appeared at Philadelphia at the convention, at any point, only 25 out of 55 had slaves. That's, not even half, all right? So I make that argument because the Constitution and its framers, all right, are a reflection of the day. The framers took great pains to use nice euphemisms, such as persons held to service and other persons when referring to enslaved people, but not using the word slavery, all right? So there are several provisions of the original Constitution which in any way reflect on slavery, all right? And they do not in any way give wholehearted endorsement to the institution, but as I said before, give it begrudging recognition. They are as follows: the 3/5 clause, okay, the slave trade protection clause, all right, the insurrections clause, and the fugitive slave clause, all right, and last but not least, the 13th Amendment, which abolished the institution altogether. We'll go through these real quick, all right. First, the 3/5 clause located in Article 1, Section 2, Clause 3, the clause that you often hear people say declared blacks to be 3/5 of a human being, which is, of course, total garbage and rubbish, was inserted largely as a compromise over how enslaved blacks would be counted for House seats in the U.S. House of Representatives. The North didn't want enslaved people counted at all because they had no rights, nor could they participate in society, so why count them? The North had slaves, but their numbers were fairly low, so it was of no significant consequence to them one way or another. The South had large amounts of slaves, so obviously they wanted them all counted because it would give them more political power. All right. So the compromise was to count 3/5 of the slave population. All right. Every 5 slaves would count as 3 people. Every 50, basically doing the math, every 50 slaves would count as 30 free people. All right. In the House, all free people, regardless of color, were counted. Free blacks were counted the same way as whites. All right. Free blacks were counted the same way as whites. I had to make that known because a lot of people don't seem to think that was the case. All right. Only enslaved people was their debate. All right. And so that was how they resolved the debate. 3/5 of the slave population would be counted. Had nothing to do with biology of a human being. Enslaved blacks were not viewed as 3/5 of a human being. Anybody that tells you that bullshit, all right, just look at them cross-eyed and keep on walking because they obviously don't know what they're talking about. All right. The next provision is the Slave Trade Protection Clause found in Article 1, Section 9, Clause 1. Which prohibited Congress from ending America's participation in the slave trade for 20 years after the Constitution went into effect. 20 years from 1788 would be 1808, all right? And officially, as of 1808, America, under President Thomas Jefferson, ceased participation in the international slave trade, the first year allowed under the Constitution, all right? Next clause is the Insurrections Clause located in Article 1, Section 8, Clause 15. That clause gives the federal government the power to quell and shut down domestic insurrections. Lots of people have said that this clause was primarily motivated against slave insurrections. And while certainly that was on the minds of some, what was more freshly and obviously on the minds of everyone was Shays' Rebellion in Massachusetts, which lasted for several months, which took a great amount of manpower to subdue. All right. So that was on the minds of people when they wrote this clause. All right, domestic insurrections. All right, Shays' Rebellion lasted for several months, and we couldn't have anything like that again. The federal government under the Articles didn't have any power to put such a thing down. All right, That is the motive behind the Insurrections Clause. And of course, a slave insurrection would obviously be included, but that was arguably not on the forefront of most people's minds. Shays' Rebellion in Massachusetts was. And last but not least, the Fugitive Slave Clause in Article 4, Section 2, Clause 3 mandated that states where fugitives had run to were not allowed to interfere with the return of those fugitives to where they'd come from. It didn't mean that the states had to help in the return of such persons, but they couldn't interfere with it on the same token. All right, as stated by the Supreme Court in the case of Prigg versus Pennsylvania in 1842. All right, last but not least, the 13th Amendment to the Constitution, adopted in December of 1865, nullified the 3/5 clause, all right, the Fugitive Slave Clause, all right, slave trade protection was outlawed by regular congressional enactment. And of course, the Insurrections Clause still remains in use for any domestic insurrection of any kind. All right. So the 13th Amendment reads, neither slavery nor involuntary servitude, except for punishment for a crime wherein the party shall have been duly convicted, shall exist within the United States or any land subject to their jurisdiction thereof. Obviously, the 13th Amendment abolished chattel slavery in America forever and only allowed for involuntary servitude if once a party has been convicted of a crime. All right. So, that in mind, that's where the Constitution mentions the subject of slavery. None of these provisions say, yay, slavery is good. Rather, they are begrudging recognition of the institution with the necessity of compromise to get the South to go along with the document. Several times during the convention, the Southern delegates, mainly from South Carolina and Georgia, threatened to walk out if the institution of slavery was threatened. All right, and these compromises were necessary to get the nation you have today and to get the document that you have, known as the Constitution. All right? So, for the record, no framer of the Constitution ever defended slavery on moral grounds, only economic ones. All right? Nobody, even the largest slaveholders present, defended slavery on moral grounds. They all knew slavery was wrong, and all of them had misgivings about the institution. But as usual, money talks. All right, and that is what led them to defend the institution and urge that it be protected by our nation's founding document, our nation's current constitution. All right. Notable slaveholders at the convention: James Madison, who was the father of the Constitution, George Mason, and John Rutledge. All right, all who were very large slaveholders, attacked the institution morally, but Rutledge and others, not Madison, Rutledge defended it, and Pinckney and others defended it on economic grounds. All right, unfortunately. James Madison, the father of the Constitution, a large slaveholder himself, obviously expressed many moral misgivings about slavery in his lifetime, both here and later on. All right. Other northern abolitionists who never held slaves: Gouverneur Morris of Pennsylvania, Alexander Hamilton of New York. All right. Benjamin Franklin, all abolitionists attacked the institution of slavery very, very vehemently. All right. And other framers, such as John Adams of Massachusetts, Thomas Jefferson of Virginia, who were neither present at the Constitutional Convention, Adams especially, never a slaveholder, my favorite framer, by the way, and wrote many misgivings about the institution of slavery, hoping to see it abolished in this nation sooner or later. And Thomas Jefferson had always, in spite of being one of Virginia's largest slaveholders, attacked the institution of slavery as morally repugnant. Jefferson was a lifelong opponent of the slave trade and did everything in his human power in his lifetime to end it, both in the state of Virginia and internationally, with respect to America, which was indeed accomplished during his presidency. All right. So I'll conclude by saying once again that the Constitution of the United States was not a pro-slavery document, but a document which gave slavery begrudging recognition in order to have a perfect union. The framers essentially left the question for their posterity to deal with another day, which was ultimately done. All right. You want a pro-slavery document? Check out the Constitution of the Confederate States of America, where they had no qualms about why that country was being founded. So I thank you so much for listening. Hope you learned something from this video. Knowledge is power. Stay tuned for more exciting and informative history. Take care, stay safe out there, and I'll talk to you at the next video. Peace out.